we got a list today of the most expensive or the most unaffordable cities for housing in the English-speaking world. And can you believe it? Side note, yes, you can. That 3 of the cities in the top 10 are in Australia. Hong Kong was the #1 most unaffordable city in the English-speaking world, but it then goes second, Sydney. What a surprise. Oh, it says on the screen there Adelaide's the first. It's not, but we'll ignore that for a moment.
Adelaide's 9th.
So Sydney is second.
Sorry, Adelaide.
Adelaide is awesome.
Defamation.
Sydney is
Adelaide's going to
second.
sue.
Melbourne is 7th. Adelaide is 9th. And Brisbane is 13th. So in the top 15 cities in the world with the most unaffordable housing, Australia has 4 of them. Anglicare Australia Executive Director Casey Chambers spoke exactly, not the singer, I don't think, but I kind of wish it was. She says it's the worst it's ever been. This is not hyperbole. It is Australia's new normal. Results have never been so bad for a person on the minimum wage, with affordability halving over the last year. Now, bugger being on the minimum wage, it's not even good for someone who's earning even $150,000 a year in a city like Sydney. I think that the latest numbers that we saw was something like, for an average house to be affordable in Sydney, you've got to be earning at least $186,000.
Yeah.
It is beyond a joke now.
Even double income, white collar, professional families now, they are saying struggling to. And I'm not surprised. I'm on a very good wicket these days, and I am honestly, there's not a day goes by that I don't stress about. Going backwards, and if I'm thinking that right at the top of the pile, just imagine what people who are just eking out an existence week to week are thinking. I know from Salvos and Vinnies and Food Bank, we've got people otherwise once were perfectly average normal middle class people going to Vinnies or the Salvos. They've never had to rely on charity ever before, and now they're going there literally just to ask for food, so they can put food on the table. Now, how that can happen? I mean, Food Bank did this incredible report that we wrote about a few months ago, where vast numbers of thousands upon thousands of families, a huge proportion, 1 in 5, I think at times, were struggling to put food on the table, or were going hungry so that their kids could eat and wouldn't know that there wasn't enough food for everybody. It is absolutely staggering. Having said all that, Adelaide is awesome, and I'm so glad that it's finally getting the recognition it deserves. I've said for the last 30 years that Adelaide is the city of the future. It's like Melbourne before Melbourne got too cool for school.
You are so right. And look, I always proselytise about how good Adelaide is, being a former Adelaide boy. And it's quite staggering to see Adelaide on a list like this. You go, normally you think of, Adelaide's a lot cheaper than everywhere else. And I used to tell everyone that it was. But it's not now, fundamentally because people have packed up from places like Melbourne and Sydney, and they've gone to places like Brisbane and Adelaide, because they realised, if you were an early adopter, they realised, I could spend $2 million on some, 3-bedroom townhouse in Sydney if I'm lucky, or for $2 million over in Adelaide, I've got a really nice house on a good piece of property really close to the city. But of course, people realised that, so they started doing it quite significantly, and now all the prices have gone up, which is great for me because I own property in Adelaide, so keep going there and keep pumping the city up. And it's great if you own property in Adelaide before that, but people in Adelaide who were some of the only ones in the country who actually felt growing up that they might be able to buy a house when they left school and went to work, even they now are going, well, heck, I may as well be in Sydney. It's that bad.
Time to move to Mount Gambier.
No, you don't want to be in Sydney. This is actually the 15th time in 16 years Sydney has made the top 3. Of the most expensive cities in the world, not the country, in the world, to try and buy a home. To break these numbers down, Sydney prices are 13.8 times the average income. Again, who the heck can afford that? Adelaide is the same as the national average, which is 9.7 times the average income. Interestingly, this annual demographia study said that there has been a strong association between severely unaffordable housing and net migration. So I know you disagree, Joe, but this study is on the money, I believe. And it spoke about at length about the deterioration of the middle class as a result. And that is what we are looking at here in Australia as more and more people simply cannot afford a home. For decades, the hallmark of a healthy middle class was the ability to be able to build a home. And as early as the 1990s, fascinating report, read it if you can, as early as the 1990s, they say that the average price of the home was just, let me get this right, 3 times or less than the average household income. So in the space of 30 years, we are now looking at 3 times plus more than that. And nobody can afford it.
No, that's right. I was exactly. I was going to say just that. I remember looking into this years ago. So in the 80s and even the early 90s, as you say, it was the average house was 3 times the average annual wage. So in other words, if you worked for 3 years and didn't spend any money, didn't eat or whatever, but took all that money, you'd be able to afford to buy. You'd be able to buy a house outright. And now it is, again, 13 times in Sydney. So you would have to be able to afford to buy a house, you'd have to work non-stop, not have anything else.
40 years.
For 13 years, which is almost as long as, some home loans were there in the day. So
exactly.
It is crazy.
And of course, if you can't afford to buy a house, the only alternative is for you to rent, and you want to hope you're not renting in Marybeck Council in Melbourne at the moment, because, my God, they voted last night to investigate the idea of charging double rates on rental properties. So if you are a property investor who owns a house or a unit or whatever in Marybeck Council, and let's never forget that Marybeck is a made-up name. They changed it from Moreland Council to Marybeck Council because Marybeck was meant to be some Aboriginal word, and then an Aboriginal elder told the Herald Sun that Marybeck didn't actually exist in the language. So just let that sink in.
It's a nonsense word.
This is the sort of virtue signalling council we're talking about here, right? So they now want to charge landlords double rates, and the only way they can do that, and this is how they're going to try and get away with it, is to then charge people who own their homes outright half the rates they can at the moment. Because in Victoria, they have rate capping. So the council is only allowed to take a certain amount of money out of rates. That's mandated by the state government. So in order for them to charge landlords double rates, it means they have to charge actual homeowners half rates. And if you're an actual homeowner, you probably go, oh, that's great, I'm really happy, I'll take my half rates. And why wouldn't you? But just think for a moment, the 34.7% of households in Marybeck that are renting, who do you think is going to end up paying this double rate? It's not going to be the landlord, it's going to be the renter. So there's the council, all high and mighty, and the councillor who got this over the line, James Conlon, he was a former Green himself. Now he's independent. I know. So he's saying we're gonna charge him double, and that'll get all the property investors out of Marybeck. No, they're just going to pass the cost on to the renters who are already paying through the nose to live in your councils. They found another way to make it worse
they couldn't do that, Caleb, because, of course, if they jack up the rents in all these rental properties, then the renters are just going to go out and rent somewhere else because there's so many other rental properties on the market. It's not like they're completely stuck where they are and have no choice but to pay the higher rent because the rental market is tighter than a... Oh, you can't say that on television.
Well, this is way...
It's very, very tight.